The dust had not even settled on the road before August Ellsworth saw her, and the sight of a woman riding a lathered horse at that kind of speed told him everything he needed to know about the kind of trouble that was coming with her. It was the summer of 1882, deep in the territory of New Mexico, when the heat pressed down on the land like a flat iron on cotton, and the red earth cracked along its seams like something that had been holding itself together for too long and finally gave way. August's ranch sat 7 miles south of the town of Cimarron, a modest operation by some standards but a hard-earned one, with 260 head of cattle, a bunkhouse that slept 4 ranch hands, a good well, and a house he had built himself over the course of 3 years from timber hauled in from the mountains to the north. He was 31 years old, broad across the shoulders, with sun-darkened skin and dark brown hair that curled a little at the ears when it got too long, which it often did because he rarely had occasion to bother with barbering. He was not an unhappy man, but he was a solitary one, and most folks in Cimarron thought of him as the kind of man who would be a bachelor until the earth claimed him, not because he was disagreeable, but because he seemed to have found a peace with his own company that made other arrangements feel unnecessary. He was mending fence along the eastern pasture that afternoon when the sound of hoofbeats reached him. He straightened up, squinted against the glare, and watched the rider coming down the old Raton road at a dead gallop. The horse was a dark bay with a white blaze, and it was running hard, its sides heaving, flecks of foam at its neck. The rider sat low and forward, the way someone rides when they are not trying to look graceful, but are instead trying to survive. August dropped his fence pliers and walked toward the road with no particular urgency, because urgency at first sight had gotten men killed in this country, and he preferred to understand a situation before committing himself to it. She pulled the horse up short when she saw him, and the animal danced in a circle, blowing hard, its eyes wide and showing white at the edges. The woman on its back was something August did not immediately have words for. She was 24 or 25, he guessed, with dark chestnut hair that had come loose from whatever arrangement it had started the day in and was now wild around her face and shoulders. Her eyes were the color of amber in sunlight, a kind of warm, bright brown that hit him somewhere behind the sternum before he could brace himself against it. She was wearing a divided riding skirt the color of tobacco, a white blouse with the top 2 buttons undone from the heat and the riding, and a coat that she had plainly tied to the back of the saddle because it was too hot to wear it. There was dust on her face and on her hands and on the leather of the saddle, and she was breathing almost as hard as the horse. "Is this private land?" she asked, and her voice was clear and direct, the kind of voice that had learned not to waste itself on pleading. "It is," August said. She looked back over her shoulder at the road behind her, then looked at him again, and he could see her calculating something behind those amber eyes, measuring him against some internal scale of risk. "There is a Marshal coming behind me," she said. "He is about 2 hours back, maybe less. The horse needed water and I needed somewhere to stop that wasn't the road." August looked at the horse, then at her, then at the horse again. The animal was a good one, that much was plain. Good bone, deep chest, long, clean legs. It was also not the kind of horse that a woman in a traveling coat typically owned, and both of them knew he could see that. "Is that your horse?" he asked. She held his gaze with a steadiness that he found remarkable given the circumstances. "I borrowed it," she said, "without asking." There was a beat of silence in which the only sounds were the horse breathing and a meadowlark somewhere in the pasture grass, and the hot wind moving through the fence wire. "Ride into the barn," August said. "Follow the fence line south and you will see it." "Red roof." She stared at him for one more second, as if she was waiting for the catch, and when she did not find one she gave a single nod and reined the horse south, moving at a walk now because the animal had nothing left to give at a gallop, and August watched her go before he picked up his pliers and walked back to the fence and stood there for a while not mending anything, just thinking. He put the tools away in the pasture box and walked back toward the house and then toward the barn, taking his time, letting her settle before he showed up. When he came through the barn doors, the horse was in the third stall. The saddle had been pulled and was resting on the stall rail, and the woman was using a twist of clean straw to rub the bay down in long, practiced strokes. She knew what she was doing with a horse. That told him something. "There is a bucket," he said, "and the water trough is at the end of the row, not too much at once. He is too hot still." "I know," she said, not unkindly, just stating a fact. He took the bucket, filled it halfway from the trough, and brought it to the stall. The horse dropped its nose into it and drank with deep, grateful pulls. "I am August Ellsworth," he said. She glanced up from her rubbing. "Elvira Doyle." He leaned against the stall post. "You want to tell me what a marshal is chasing you for, Elvira Doyle, or would you rather I just wonder about it?" She finished the long stroke she was in the middle of before she answered, which he noted. She was not the kind of person who could be rushed into speech. "The horse belongs to a man named Cal Hurst," she said. "He is the man who owns the land my family's farm sits on and has sat on for 11 years. He gave my father a loan 6 years ago, and the interest on it has been compounding in ways that my father did not fully understand when he signed the paper. And last month Hurst told us we had 30 days to clear out or he would have the law remove us." She paused and moved to the horse's other side. "My father is not a well man. He has a lung condition. Moving him in summer heat would likely kill him. I went to Hurst's house to talk to him and he refused to see me. He had his man throw me off the property. I went back the next morning on foot and Hurst set his dogs on me. So when I left, I took the fastest horse from his stable because it seemed to me that a man who would set dogs on a woman asking for a reasonable conversation had forfeited his right to his horse for a day." August was quiet for a moment. "And the Marshal Garrett Birch out of Santa Fe," she said. "Hurst has him in his pocket or near enough to it. Birch rode out to our farm this morning with a notice saying I was to be brought in for horse theft. I was already gone." "Gone where?" "I was going to Santa Fe," she said, "to the land office. My father kept a copy of the original deed and the loan agreement both, and I believed that if I could get them before a territorial judge, someone with more authority than Birch, we might have a case. Do you still have those papers?" She reached inside the coat that was folded over the saddle rail and pulled out a flat oilskin envelope. "Right here." August looked at the envelope and then at her and then at the envelope again. "How far back is your family's farm?" "About 40 miles northeast," she said. "Near Rayado." He did some arithmetic in his head. "And you rode this horse 40 miles today?" 38, she said. "I cut through the Cimarron Canyon to save time." He nodded slowly. The canyon was rough country, the kind of riding that discouraged most people. She had done it on a stolen horse with a Marshal behind her, and she was standing here in his barn rubbing the horse down like it was the most ordinary afternoon of her life. "All right," he said. "Let me think." "You do not have to involve yourself," she said quickly. "I am not asking you to hide me from the law or to do anything that would put you on the wrong side of things. If you need me to go, I will go. I told you to ride into the barn," he said. "I do not say things I do not mean. Sit tight." He left her there and went into the house, where his ranch hand Denny Oakes was drinking coffee at the kitchen table. Denny was 50 years old and had been on this ranch for 6 of those years and knew August well enough to read his face when he came through the door. "What happened?" Denny asked. "Woman in the barn," August said. "Riding a horse she took from a man named Cal Hurst up near Rayado. Marshal Birch is coming behind her." Denny set his coffee cup down. "Birch is no friend to honest people." "No, he is not," August agreed. Birch had a reputation in the territory that did not encourage confidence. He was technically legal. He wore a badge and had papers to prove it. But the people he served were always the people with money enough to hire him, and the law he applied bent conveniently in the direction of the man who paid. It was not an uncommon arrangement in 1882 New Mexico, which had only been a formal territory for 30 years, and had not yet grown into the kind of governance that reliably distinguished between justice and whoever could afford to purchase it. "What do you want to do?" Denny asked. "Get Tom and Ray's in from the south pasture," August said. "I want the horses in the barn and I want the barn doors closed." If Birch comes, he has no cause to search my property without permission, and I will not give him permission." Denny stood. "And the woman, she is a guest," August said. "Get her something to eat and a place to rest. She has had a hard day." He went back out to the barn. She was sitting on a hay bale now, the oilskin envelope in her lap, her hat off and resting beside her, and she looked tired in a way she had been holding back up until this moment. The way people hold tiredness at bay when they are moving and let it descend when they finally stop. He felt something move in him at the sight of her, something careful and unfamiliar, and he let it pass without examining it too closely. "Marshal may come through here," he said. "He has no cause to enter my barn without my word. If he asks about a woman, I have not seen one. The rest of my crew will be the same." She looked at him. "Why are you doing this?" "Because what you described sounds like a man using the law as a weapon," he said, "and I have seen that before, and it sits poorly with me. And because your horse needs another 2 hours of rest before it can go anywhere, and if I turn you out now, I am turning out the horse too, and the horse has not done anything wrong at all." Something softened briefly in her expression, a flicker of something warm and almost amused, and then it was composed again. "Thank you," she said. "My man Denny will bring you food," August said. "Stay in here for now. I will come for you when I know Birch has gone or not come at all." He went back out and stood on the porch of the house and watched the road to the north, and the afternoon moved through its long golden second half, and the shadows got longer and no one came. By the time the sun was sitting on the edge of the western hills, Denny had confirmed that no rider had come down the Raton road from the north, and August began to think that either Birch had lost her trail in the canyon or had stopped in Cimarron for the night. He brought supper to the barn himself, which was not something he had planned to do, but which seemed to be what happened. Denny had put together a plate of cornbread and salt pork and boiled beans, and August carried it out with a tin cup of water and a second one of coffee, and he found Elvira standing at the stall door watching the horse eat hay with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had determined that the animal was going to be all right. "He is looking better," August said. "He is," she said. "He is a good horse. I hated running him that hard." "Well," August said, setting the food on the hay bale, "he will remember today. Horses do. He will not forgive Hurst for sending him on that kind of ride either." She turned and looked at him with an expression he could not entirely decode. It was interested and measuring and a little cautious all at once. "You know horses well," she said. "I have had them since I was 6 years old," he said. "Sit down and eat. You can look at him while you do it." She sat. She ate the cornbread first, methodically, the way people eat when they are very hungry but have been raised not to show it, and August leaned against the stall post and watched the horse and was aware, without looking at her directly, of everything about her. "Have you always ranched here?" she asked. "No," he said. "I came out from Kentucky in '76, worked 3 other ranches before I saved enough to start this one. Alone, mostly," he said. "I had a partner for the first year, fellow named Hal Combs. He went back east, said the territory was trying to kill him every single day and he preferred to be somewhere that was only trying to kill him some of the days." She made a small sound that might have been a laugh. He was not entirely wrong about the territory. "No," August agreed. "But I liked it anyway. There is something about a place that requires something of you." She was quiet for a moment, looking at the horse. "My father came out from Ohio in '68, she said. He had enough money to buy a mule and some seed corn and a few months of hope. He built the farm from nothing. He built it with his hands. And now a man who has never had dirt under his fingernails in his life is going to take it because the paperwork tilts in his favor." She paused. "If I can get these documents to a judge who is not owned by Hurst, there is a chance. The loan terms as my father understood them were not what the paper says. The figures were changed after my father signed." August straightened. "You are saying the document was altered?" "I am saying the numbers that my father wrote down in his own journal the evening he came back from signing that loan are different from what the document currently says," she said. "And my father is many things, but he is not a man who gets numbers wrong. He kept accounts for a hardware merchant in Ohio for 12 years before he came west. Then you need a lawyer, not just a judge, August said. You need someone who can read the document and the original paper together and make the argument. I know, she said. I was hoping to find one in Santa Fe. August thought for a while. The horse shifted in the stall and shook its mane and blew softly through its nose. Somewhere out in the dark the crickets were loud and untroubled. There is a man in Cimarron, August said carefully. Ezra Holt. He is not exactly a lawyer, but he has read more law than most men who call themselves lawyers, and he has a gift for finding what is wrong in a document. He helped me when I was buying this land, and the title had a lien on it that the seller had not disclosed. He found it in an afternoon. Elvira looked at him steadily. Would he help someone like me? Someone who cannot pay him much. He might, August said. Ezra Holt dislikes dishonesty more than he likes money, which is a rare quality. I will talk to him in the morning. She studied him for a long moment. The lantern was hanging from the center beam, and it threw warm, uneven light across both their faces, and in that light her amber eyes were the color of honey held up to a candle flame. You are a very strange rancher, August Ellsworth, she said. How do you mean? He asked. Most men in your position would have sent me back down the road, she said. Trouble is contagious out here, and most people know better than to catch it. Maybe, he said. But trouble that is unjust bothers me more than trouble that is just inconvenient, and what you have described is unjust. She looked at him for one more moment, and whatever she was measuring in him, he had the sense that he had passed the test, though she would not say so in plain words. Good night, August Ellsworth, she said. Good night, Elvira Doyle, he said, and he took the lantern to the door and hung a second one on the peg inside for her and went to the house. And he lay in his bed that night for a long time with the window open, and the hot New Mexico dark coming in, and the crickets still at it. And he thought about amber eyes and oilskin envelopes, and a woman who rode through a canyon on a stolen horse, rather than give up her father's farm without a fight. He was at the barn before sunup, and she was awake, standing outside the barn door with her arms crossed, watching the sky go from black to dark blue to the kind of burning pink that the territory did better than any other place on earth. Did you sleep? He asked. Some, she said. More than I expected to. The horse is ready if you want to water him, August said, and Denny has coffee and eggs in the house. She turned and looked at him with that cautious, measuring look. Is it all right for me to be in the house? He blinked. The question caught him sideways. Of course, he said. It is a house. You are a person. Those two things are compatible. She made that small sound again, the one that was almost a laugh. I only meant from a propriety standpoint. Denny and Tom and Ray's will all be in there eating, he said. It is a working ranch kitchen, not a parlor. Propriety can manage itself. She nodded and went to the horse first, as he had expected she would, and watered him and checked his legs and his feet with the attentive efficiency of someone who knew what she was looking at. And then she came into the kitchen and sat at the end of the table where he indicated and ate scrambled eggs and drank coffee and was introduced to Denny, who was plainly charmed by her despite his best effort to appear neutral about the whole situation, and to Tom Beale, who was 22 and red-haired and dropped his fork twice in her presence, and to Ray's Montoya, who was 35 and had a wife in town and treated Elvira with the warm, uncomplicated respect of a man who knew how to be around women without making a performance of it. After breakfast, August said he was going to ride into Cimarron, and Denny looked at him with the particular expression he used when he understood something completely and intended to say nothing about it. You do not have to come, August told Elvira. In fact, it may be better if you stay here for now. Birch may be in town. She set her coffee cup down. I will not hide on your ranch indefinitely. I have things I need to do. One day, he said. Let me find out if Birch is in Cimarron or if he has gone north again, and let me talk to Ezra Holt. Give me one day and we will know more than we know now. She looked at the table for a moment. He could see the effort it cost her, the woman who had come this far alone, the woman who had ridden through a canyon on a borrowed horse rather than wait for someone else to solve things, sitting still and letting someone else go first for one day. One day, she said. He rode into Cimarron at a good pace and arrived in time for the town to be fully awake and going about its business. Cimarron in 1882 was a real town with real ambitions, not just a stage stop. It had a hotel, a general store, a hardware merchant, a doctor, 2 saloons, a church that had services on Sundays, and occasionally on days when something bad had happened that needed addressing, a post office, and a small newspaper that came out twice a week, and was written almost entirely by its editor, a fierce and opinionated woman named Mrs. Cordelia Farmer who had opinions about everything, and shared them in newsprint without apparent concern for whether anyone agreed. He went to Ezra Holt's house first. Ezra was 60 years old and had come to New Mexico from Virginia before the war and had never gone back, and he kept a house that was more library than home, with shelves of law books and land records and maps covering most of the walls and papers stacked on every flat surface. He answered the door in shirt sleeves with ink on his fingers and listened to August's summary of the situation with the focused, forward-leaning attention of a man who found irregularities in documents the way a hunting dog finds a scent. "Cal Hurst," Ezra said when August finished. "I know the name. He has been buying up land north of the canyon for about 4 years now. Small farms, mostly. Bought 3 that I know of, possibly more. Each one acquired under circumstances that when described to me made my eye twitch." He paused. "Altered loan terms are serious. If the woman's father can testify to what he understood the terms to be, and if the numbers in his journal are inconsistent with the document, that is fraud. That is not just a civil matter, that is a criminal one." "Can you look at the papers?" August asked. "Bring them to me," Ezra said. "Bring her to me, actually. I need to hear her account directly." "Birch may be in town," August said. "Birch," Ezra said with a slight curling of his lip, "is in town. He came in last evening and is staying at the hotel. He has been making inquiries about a woman on a dark bay horse." He paused. "He does not know about your place." "Yet," August said. "Yet," Ezra agreed. "But you have time. Bring her after dark. I will have the lamps on." August went from Ezra's house to the general store to get a few things he could plausibly claim to have needed regardless of anything else, and while he was there Mrs. Cordelia Farmer came in to collect her mail and saw him, and immediately engaged him in conversation with the directness of a woman who considered social niceties a waste of good time. "You have the look of a man with a situation," she said. "Good morning, Mrs. Farmer," he said. "Yes, yes," she said. "What is it? You look like you are carrying something." "I am carrying a sack of coffee beans," he said. She gave him the look she reserved for people who were trying to be clever at her. "August Ellsworth, I have known you for 3 years and you look as a man looks when something is happening that has not happened to him before." She paused. "Is it a woman?" He took his coffee beans to the counter and paid for them and said nothing, which Mrs. Farmer took as confirmation. He could hear her saying something to herself as he left, something that might have been satisfying or might have been exasperated, and he could not quite tell which and did not look back to find out. He checked the hotel on his way out, walking past the front window casually enough to see inside without appearing to look, and he saw Birch at the dining table with the proprietor of the hotel and another man he did not recognize. Birch was a big, square man with a neatly trimmed mustache, and the kind of settled self-certainty that came from having operated in a territory long enough to know that no one was going to effectively challenge him. He was eating a large breakfast and talking, and looked entirely comfortable and unhurried, which was not good, because an unhurried Birch was a Birch who believed he knew where his quarry was and was not worried about losing her. August rode home at a pace slightly more urgent than he had ridden in, and found Elvira in the garden behind the house, which startled him slightly. She had found it on her own, evidently, a small kitchen garden that he kept growing, because it had been there when he bought the land and he found it easier to tend it than to let it die, and she was pulling weeds from between the rows of squash, with the methodical efficiency of someone who had done this particular task since childhood. He stood at the garden gate for a moment before she noticed him. She was working with her sleeves rolled up and her hair pulled back, and there was dirt on her hands again, and she was humming something he could not quite identify, something low and tuneful, and the sight of her there in the late morning light in the garden that had been tended by no one but him for 6 years did something complicated and irreversible to the region of his chest. "I hope you do not mind," she said when she looked up and saw him. "I cannot sit still. It is not in me." "I do not mind," he said. He opened the gate and came in and stood at the end of the row. "The weeds and the squash have been bothering me for a week." "I can see that," she said mildly. He told her what Ezra had said and what he had seen of Birch in town, and she listened with her face composed and still and her hands resting on her knees. "He knows I am somewhere nearby," she said. "Likely," August said, "but he does not know exactly where, or he would have come last night. Ezra wants to see you and the papers after dark tonight. He thinks there is a real case here if the numbers in your father's journal are what you say." "They are," she said quietly. "I copied them down myself 2 years ago when my father first started worrying about the loan. He showed me the journal entry and I wrote it down on a separate paper and kept it. I have that too." August looked at her. "You kept a copy of the journal entry 2 years ago." "My father was worried," she said. "And when my father is worried, he is usually right to be worried. He has good instincts even if he does not always know what to do with them." "Does he know you left?" August asked. "I left a note," she said. "He will be frightened, but he understands that someone had to go and he cannot travel." She paused. "My mother passed 4 years ago. It has been just the two of us." The garden was quiet for a moment, except for the sound of a bird somewhere in the cottonwood tree at the corner of the fence. "I am sorry about your mother," August said. She nodded, accepting the condolence without drowning in it. "Thank you," she said. She would have been the one to go to the land office herself. She was the practical one. "My father is a good man, but he tends to hope that things will work out, and sometimes things do not work out by themselves." "It sounds like you took after her," August said. She looked at him for a moment, and something in her expression was unexpectedly open, like a window that had been closed a long time and been briefly pushed open by a passing wind. "I am trying to," she said. He spent the rest of the day on the ranch, doing the work that needed doing, and he was conscious all day of where she was in relation to him, the way you are conscious of a lamp in a dark room, not because you are staring at it but because the light is simply present. She helped Denny in the kitchen at noon without being asked and without making a production of it. She checked on the bay horse twice that he saw, and probably more times than that. She sat on the porch in the late afternoon and read a book she had found on the shelf near the kitchen door, which was a tattered copy of Great Expectations that August had carried out from Kentucky and read 3 times. And when he came past her, she looked up and said, "You have read this one hard," which was her way of noting the cracked spine and soft pages, and he said yes, and she looked at him as though that information had moved something in her internal accounting of him. And then she went back to reading. After dark they rode to Cimarron together, August and Elvira, keeping off the main road and coming into town from the south side, moving quietly through the dark. She rode the bay, who was sufficiently recovered to carry her at a walk and a trot without difficulty. August rode his own horse, a gray gelding named Providence, and he kept himself between her and the road the whole way without making a display of it. Ezra's house was lit up as promised. They came in through the back door, and Ezra shook Elvira's hand with both of his, which was the gesture he used when he was impressed by someone, and he sat her down at his big table with the documents spread out under the brightest lamp, and he looked at everything for a long time without speaking. August stood near the window and watched the street outside, and Elvira sat very still at the table and watched Ezra read, and the clock on Ezra's shelf ticked through 20 minutes and then 30. Ezra finally set his reading glasses down and looked at Elvira. "The figures on this loan document have been altered," he said. "I am not a handwriting expert, but I can see that the ink in two of the numerical entries is slightly different from the rest of the document, and the way the numbers are formed in those two entries is inconsistent with the formation of the numbers elsewhere. More significantly, the interest rate as stated in this document compounded on these terms would make it functionally impossible for a small farm operation to ever retire the debt. That is not an accident, that is design. Elvira's hands were flat on the table. August could see them from where he stood. And her father's journal entry, August asked. The numbers her father recorded are consistent with a loan that could actually be repaid, Ezra said. They describe different terms entirely. The interest rate that her father wrote down is half of what appears on this document. He looked at Elvira. The question is whether we can get this before the territorial judge, and whether Judge Armand Collies, who is the sitting judge in Santa Fe, can be trusted to look at this without Hearst's influence touching him first. Is Collies honest? August asked. He is more honest than Birch, Ezra said, which was a careful answer. He is a political creature and he reads the room before he decides what justice looks like. But he is also, at his core, a man who dislikes being used. If Hearst has been operating this scheme on multiple farms, and I believe he has, and if we can present a pattern rather than a single case, Collies will see the danger of being associated with something that broad. What do we need? Elvira asked. Her voice was very steady. We need testimony from your father, Ezra said. His journal, your copy of the journal entry, this document, and if possible, any other families who had loans with Hearst and can speak to the same kind of discrepancy. Elvira was quiet for a moment. I know of 2 other families, she said slowly. The Garcias, who lost their farm 18 months ago, and the Brennan family, who are still on their land but barely. If they kept records, they need to keep those records, Ezra said, and they need to keep themselves available. I am going to write a letter to a colleague of mine in Santa Fe, a man named Fletcher Howe who actually has passed the bar in the territory, and I am going to ask him to take this case. Fletcher Howe has appeared before Collies before, and Collies respects him, which is more than most can say. Elvira looked at August. He was watching her from the window and she caught his eye and held it for a moment. And in that moment he saw the full weight of what she was carrying, the father with bad lungs, the farm that 11 years of work had built, the mother who was gone, the road she had ridden alone today, and she did not ask for sympathy or look for rescue. She looked at him the way a person looks at someone they trust to tell them the truth about whether the plan is sound, and he gave her a small nod, and she turned back to Ezra. Tell me what I need to do, she said. They rode home through the dark in the same quiet they had come in, and the stars were enormous over the territory that night, the kind of sky that reminded August why he had stayed in New Mexico when everything east of it was easier. He could hear her horse's footfalls beside his own and the soft sounds of the night around them, and after a while she said quietly, "Do you believe it will work?" "I believe Ezra is right that the document has been tampered with," he said. "And I believe there is a case. Whether it works depends on things we cannot entirely control." "I know," she said. "I know that." A pause. "But do you think it will work?" He looked at her profile in the starlight. "Yes," he said, "I do." She let out a breath that was not quite a sigh. "Thank you for that," she said. They rode in silence for a while longer, and then she said, "Your garden, the squash is going to be tremendous this year if the grasshoppers leave it alone." He looked at her. "I know," he said. "I have been worrying about the grasshoppers." "You need to put wood ash around the border of the rows," she said. "They do not like the texture of it on their legs." My mother swore by it. "I will try that," he said. "Tomorrow," she said, with a firmness that was slightly surprised out of her, as if she had not entirely meant to imply she would be there tomorrow, and then she was quiet again. He did not say anything about it. He just rode and let the night be what it was. In the morning there was a problem, which was that Tom Beale came in from the road at a run to say that a man on a gray horse had stopped at the turnoff from the main road and was looking at the track that led to the ranch. He had not come down the track, but he had been studying it, and Tom's description of the rider matched Birch. August told Elvira to stay in the house and went out to the front of the property himself and stood at the gate that marked the boundary of his land. And after about 10 minutes, Birch came down the track at a walk, unhurried and easy, the picture of a man who believed the territory belonged to him and was merely confirming that belief. He stopped his horse at the gate and looked at August. "Morning," he said. "Marshal," August said. "You are August Ellsworth?" Birch asked. He had a way of asking questions to which he already knew the answers, the way a man does when he wants to establish that he has done his research. "I am," August said. "I am looking for a woman," Birch said. "Elvira Doyle. 24 years old, chestnut hair, amber eyes, riding a dark bay horse that belongs to a Mr. Cal Hurst of Rayado. She came through this area yesterday afternoon. Road dust suggests she turned off somewhere between your property and the Cimarron Road." He paused. "You seen her?" August looked at him with the flattest, most neutral expression in his repertoire. "I have not." Birch looked at the barn. The doors were closed and Providence and the bay and 2 of the ranch horses were all inside, and from the outside the barn looked empty and ordinary. "You would not mind if I had a look around?" Birch asked. "I would mind," August said. "I'm a private citizen on my own property and you have no cause to search it. If you have evidence that a fugitive is on my land, get a warrant from the circuit judge in Cimarron and come back with it. I will be here." The circuit judge in Cimarron was a man named Judge Patterson who disliked Birch considerably and had said so on several recorded occasions, which both August and Birch were aware of. Birch looked at August for a long moment with eyes that were flat and professionally unreadable. "She is wanted for horse theft," he said. "Then find her," August said, "but not on my land without a warrant." Birch smiled, which was the expression he used when he was promising something that he was not saying out loud, and he turned his horse and rode back to the main road without another word. August went back into the house. Elvira was standing just inside the front window, to the side of it so she could not be seen from outside, and she had watched the whole exchange. "He did not believe you," she said. "No," August agreed. "But he also knows that if he forces his way onto private property without cause and I make noise about it, it creates problems for him. He is careful in his own way." "He will be back," she said. "He will," August said, "which means we need to move quickly. I am sending a message to Ezra today, and we need you to get to Rayado and back with your father's journal and his testimony before Birch gets a warrant." She looked at him. "That is 40 miles. 38, he said, because she had said that yesterday and it had stayed with him. "I know the shortcut through the canyon. We can go together and be back in 2 days. She said. "The bay is recovered enough to go again if we do not push him," he said, "and 2 people are harder to track than 1. He paused. "Also, frankly, I do not like the idea of you on that road alone with Birch in the area." She looked at him for a moment, and he could see her deciding whether to bristle at the last part of what he had said, and then deciding not to. "All right," she said. "When do we leave?" 2 hours, he said. "I need to talk to Denny and write to Ezra." They left in the mid-morning with enough water and food for the ride and took the canyon route, which was narrow and rocky and dramatically beautiful in a way that no matter how many times August had ridden it still caught him somewhere behind the eyes. The red walls went up 300 feet on either side, and the river ran clear and cold at the bottom, and the shadows were deep and cool even in the July heat, and a hawk circled far above them in a slice of blue sky. Elvira rode beside him where the path was wide enough for 2, and he was aware again of her the way he had been aware of her since the moment she had pulled that horse up in front of him on the road, aware of her not as a problem to be solved or a situation to be managed, but as a person who was entirely herself in a way that he found more interesting and more moving than he had the language for yet. "How did you come to be ranching?" she asked him as they picked their way through a narrow section of the canyon floor. "I worked for a man named Beaumont Halsey when I first came out," he said. "He had 3,000 head on a spread in Colorado, and he was a hard man but a fair one, and he taught me everything about cattle and about land, and about how to read weather and water and the things that matter. I worked for him for 2 years and then a smaller ranch in the Mora Valley for 2 more years, and I saved every dollar I made, and then I bought the Cimarron land from a man who was going back to Ohio. Everyone seems to be going back to Ohio, she said. It is a very persistent place, he agreed. She laughed. It was a real laugh, uncalculated and warm, and it bounced off the canyon walls and came back to them slightly altered, and he thought he would like to hear it again. What did you want when you came out here? She asked. What were you looking for? He thought about it. It was not a question he had been asked often because most people in the territory were not particularly interested in what a man had been looking for. They were interested in what he had found. I wanted something that was mine, he said. Not in a grasping way. I mean something that I had built, something that existed in the world because I put it there. The farm my family had back in Kentucky was my grandfather's, and then my father's, and I was the fourth son, which meant it was not going to be mine, and I understood that, but I wanted something of my own. I did not care if it was smaller or harder. I just wanted it to be the thing I built. She was quiet for a little while after that, thinking about it. I understand that, she said. My father's farm is the thing he built. That is why I am here. I know, August said. They stopped to water the horses at a bend in the river where the bank was flat and easy, and they ate some of the food Denny had packed while the horses drank, and August found himself sitting on a flat rock beside a woman he had met yesterday, and feeling no urgency to fill the silence, which was a thing he associated with a very specific and uncommon kind of comfort. Tell me about your mother, he said, which surprised him a little because he had not planned to say it. She looked up from the bread she was eating. Why? You mentioned her twice, he said. The way you say her name tells me she was important. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said she was called Fran. Short for Frances. She came out from Indiana as a young woman and she was afraid of nothing. She made the farm what it is. My father had the idea and she had the execution. She kept the accounts and she kept the garden and she kept both of them going in the dry years when it seemed like nothing would survive. She paused. She died of a fever in the summer of '78. It was a bad summer for fever in that part of the territory. She was 46 years old. Another pause. I still talk to her sometimes. When I am trying to figure out what to do, I ask myself what she would do, and most of the time I know. What would she say about this? August asked. All of this. Elvira looked out at the river. She would say, good, you went. And then she would say, now finish it. They reached the Doyle farm in the late afternoon of the following day, coming in from the west across the flat grassland north of the canyon. The farm was modest and well tended, a low house of adobe and timber, a small barn, a vegetable garden bigger than August's and in better shape, 2 corrals, a kitchen garden, and the look of a place that had been maintained with real care. There were chickens in the yard and a dog that came out barking, and then stopped when it recognized Elvira and went to her with its whole body wagging. That is Compass, she said, crouching to the dog, and August watched her with the dog and thought that a person who is kind to dogs without any audience is telling you something important about who they are. Her father came to the door. His name was James Doyle and he was 58, and the lung condition she had described was visible in the way he moved and breathed, a careful, deliberate quality to both that spoke of a body managing itself on limited resources. He was a tall man, lean, with gray hair and her amber eyes, and when he saw her he closed those eyes briefly and then opened them and said, Elvira Ann, which was not exactly a reprimand but contained one in the way that using a full name sometimes does. I am all right, she said. I am fine. This is August Ellsworth. He helped me. James Doyle looked at August with the careful, measuring look of a father. August stood straight and met the look honestly, because that was the only thing to do with it. Thank you, James said. Come inside. They sat at the kitchen table that evening and August listened while Elvira and her father talked, and he had the journal out on the table and the copy Elvira had made. And the numbers were exactly as she had said. Exactly what Ezra had said was the discrepancy. James explained each entry in his careful, precise way, the way a man who kept accounts for 12 years explains numbers, with full context and no hedging. He changed them, James said, looking at the original loan document with a weariness that was not surprise. I should have looked more carefully. I trusted the printed version and I should not have. You had no reason to expect fraud, Elvira said. No, he agreed. But I should have read it line by line before signing, and I did not, and that is my error. He looked at August. What are the chances of this being heard fairly? Ezra Holt thinks there is a real case, August said. If we can get to a lawyer named Fletcher Howe in Santa Fe and he can get it before Judge Colley's, the evidence is strong enough. The document shows alteration. Your journal shows the original terms, and there are other families who may be in the same situation. James Doyle looked at his hands on the table. The Garcias, he said. Maria Garcia told me the same thing happened to them. They lost their land. They went to live with her sister's family in Taos. Ezra wants us to try to find others, Elvira said. Anyone who had a Hearst loan. Brennan, James said. Patrick Brennan, he is 3 miles east of here. He has been fighting this for 6 months. We will go to him tomorrow morning, Elvira said. She looked at August. If that is all right. That is all right, he said. They slept that night at the farm. Elvira in her own room and August on a corn-husk mattress in the small sitting room with a quilt over him, and the dog sleeping against his legs without invitation, which he did not mind. He lay there thinking about the case, and about Birch, and about Judge Colley's, and about Elvira in the next room, and the thoughts about the last of those things were the ones that stayed longest before he slept. Patrick Brennan was a compact, red-faced Irishman who had been in the territory since 1870, and had built his farm from nothing and watched Hearst's lawyer show up at his door 14 months ago with numbers that did not match what he remembered, and had been fighting it with letters ever since. Letters that had gone unanswered or been returned with language so technical and circular that he could not untangle it. He had his own journal. He had kept meticulous records. He was exactly what Ezra needed. He shook August's hand with both of his when he understood what they were proposing. If there is a chance at law, I will take it, he said. I have been waiting for someone who knew how to fight this the right way. They stayed at the Doyle farm one more night and started back the following morning, and James pressed food on them and looked at his daughter for a long time before she mounted the bay, and she bent down from the saddle and took his hand and said, I will be back, Papa. With good news or with a plan, but I will be back. And he nodded and let go of her hand and stood in the yard and watched them go. The ride back was quieter than the ride out, a companionable quiet, the kind that builds between two people when they have been through something together and do not need to process it all in words. They went through the canyon as the afternoon light hit the walls and made them burn red and gold, and at one point Elvira pulled the bay up at the widest bend and just looked at it for a while, the walls and the light and the river, and August stopped Providence beside her and looked at the same thing, and then she said, This is why, very quietly. Yes, he said. She looked at him. He was looking at the canyon. Then she looked at the canyon too. Thank you, she said, for all of it. For the barn and the food and Ezra and coming with me. You did not have to do any of that. He looked at her then. I know, he said. I wanted to. Something in her expression shifted, settled, like a door that was not quite fully closed and had finally come to rest against the frame. Why? She asked. He considered the question with the same seriousness she had brought to every other question. When you pulled that horse up in front of me on the road, he said, I thought, here is a person who is entirely real. I have met a lot of people in this territory who are putting on something, some version of themselves they think the territory requires. You were not doing that. Even when you were frightened, you were entirely yourself. He paused. I found that compelling. She looked at him for a long moment. The river was loud around the bend, and the hawk was back above them, or a different hawk, riding the thermal in the stripe of sky between the walls. I find you rather compelling too, she said, with a directness that was exactly in keeping with everything he had observed of her and still startled him into a full smile, which was rare enough on his face that she looked slightly surprised to see it. Good, he said. She looked away and then back at him. August Ellsworth, she said slowly. Elvira Doyle, he said. What do we do about that, she asked. One thing at a time, he said. Let us get you your farm first. She smiled then, and it was the most complete smile he had seen from her, real and wide and changing her whole face. And then they started the horses moving again and rode the rest of the canyon out to the open land and turned south. They arrived back at the ranch to find Denny with news. Ezra had sent a message. Fletcher Howe had received Ezra's letter and was willing to take the case. He was coming up from Santa Fe in 5 days to review the documents in person. And Patterson, the circuit judge in Cimarron, had received what appeared to be a warrant request from Birch and had declined to issue it on the grounds that the evidence was insufficient, which was Patterson being Patterson, but also being, in this instance, correctly applied. Birch, according to Denny's further information sourced from Mrs. Cordelia Farmer, who knew everything about everyone because she wrote the newspaper and was therefore the person everyone told things to whether they meant to or not, had gone back to Santa Fe. Gone to regroup, August said. Gone to tell Hearst, Elvira said. Same thing, Denny said. The 5 days before Fletcher Howe arrived were the kind of days that August would later describe to himself as the time the rest of his life started, though he did not know that yet, or would not have said it if he did. Elvira stayed at the ranch because there was no safer or more logical place for her to be, and because Howe needed access to her and the documents, and because she had gotten into the habit of being there and August had gotten into the habit of her being there, and both of these things were happening in parallel, and no one was saying much about it directly. She and August fell into a pattern that was domestic and easy in a way that should have felt strange but did not. They had breakfast with the crew. She worked in the garden in the mornings. He worked the ranch. They met for dinner and talked. After dinner, they sat on the porch in the cooling evening and talked more, about anything and everything, about Kentucky and Ohio, and the territory and books and cattle and the law and weather and her mother and his grandfather, and the way light moved differently out here than anywhere either of them had come from. He was building something in himself in those conversations, laying in a foundation, and he knew it, and he thought she knew it too, because she had her own way of building things and recognized the process. On the third evening she asked him if he was lonely, and the question was direct enough that it went straight through him. I have been, he said. I did not always notice it. Being on the ranch is full if you let it be, but there is a different kind of empty than the one you can fill with work and routine. I know that kind, she said. Have you been lonely, he asked. Since my mother died, yes, she said. Not because there was no one around. My father is good company when he is well. But she was the person I talked to the way I am talking to you right now, without putting anything away first. He was very still on the porch. The night was warm and enormous and the stars were doing what they did. You are not putting anything away, he said. No, she said. I noticed that. A pause. It is unusual for me. On the fourth evening she was sitting on the porch reading when he came to sit beside her, and he had been thinking all day about what he was going to say and had not come to a conclusion and said it anyway. When this is settled, he said, when the case is done and your father's farm is secure, I would like to know what you want to do with yourself. After. She lowered the book. After what exactly? After the reason you came here is resolved, he said. I mean, I would like to know if there is something that would keep you in this part of the territory, not necessarily here, but somewhere near here. She looked at him very clearly. Are you asking me if I would consider staying? I'm not sure I am asking you that directly, he said carefully, because I have known you for 5 days and I am aware that is a very short time. But I am also aware that what happens between two people has its own timeline and does not always match the calendar, and I would rather say something honest than pretend I have no strong feeling about which way you go when this is finished. She held his gaze. You have a strong feeling, she said. I do, he said. Yes. She was quiet for a moment that stretched long and fine and taut. I am not sure what I want yet, she said at last, but I know what I do not want, which is to leave and not come back. That is something. "That is a good deal," he said. Fletcher Howe arrived on the 5th day on the afternoon stage, a thin, precise man of 45 with spectacles and a battered leather case, and the economical movements of someone who had spent many years in rooms where wasted motion was a disadvantage. He shook Auguste's hand and then Elvira's, and then sat down at the kitchen table, where Ezra was already present, and they spent 4 hours going through every document. At the end of it, Howe removed his spectacles and cleaned them and put them back on. "There is a case," he said. "A strong one. The alteration on the loan document is visible to anyone looking for it, and with your father's journal as a comparative document, the intent to defraud is arguable. If Patrick Brennan's records show the same pattern, and if we can locate the Garcia family and ascertain whether they have documentation, we may be looking at a fraudulent scheme of considerable scope." He paused. "I am going to petition Judge Collies for an emergency hearing on the grounds that the current Birch warrant, if pursued, would constitute use of law enforcement to compel the abandonment of a fraud prosecution." He looked at Elvira. "I need your father to be in Santa Fe in 3 weeks. "He cannot travel well," Elvira said. "Can he travel carefully?" Howe asked. "With time and preparation," she said. "We have 3 weeks," Howe said. "Arrange it." There followed a week of preparation and correspondence, and 2 days during which Howe and Ezra drove to the Brennan farm and returned with Patrick Brennan's records, which showed the same pattern of alteration. Howe's letter to the Garcia family in Taos was answered by Maria Garcia's brother, who said that Maria had kept everything and would be grateful to help. The picture that was assembling itself was larger than even Ezra had expected. Hearst had done this to at least 5 families over 4 years, and the compound interest scheme was calculated to make default inevitable, after which he acquired the land at auction, below its real value. During those 2 weeks, Auguste and Elvira existed in a kind of suspended intimacy that was both perfect and slightly maddening. They were not alone often, because the ranch was busy and the case required constant attention, but they carved out their time the way people do when time is scarce, and they know the value of it. Evening conversations on the porch, riding out together on the pretext of checking cattle in the east pasture. The morning she showed him the wood ash trick on the squash, and their hands nearly touched reaching for the same pot, and neither of them said anything about it, but neither of them moved away either. He brought her wildflowers once, which he did casually and without ceremony, a handful of Indian paintbrush and yellow primrose from the meadow east of the barn, and she took them and put them in a tin cup of water on the kitchen windowsill, and said thank you in a voice that was slightly lower than her usual voice. And Denny, who witnessed all of this from the corner of the room, made no comment at all, but the corners of his mouth were doing something. On the 15th day since she had ridden into his life on a stolen horse, Auguste found her in the barn in the early morning before breakfast, standing at the bay horse's stall. The horse was in better condition than when she had arrived, well fed and rested, and he nickered when she came to him. "Hearst's horse is going back," she said when Auguste came in. "I thought so," he said. "Patrick Brennan offered to ride him back to Rayado," she said. "It removes that particular issue from the situation. Howe said it would be cleaner." "It would," Auguste said. She stroked the horse's nose. "I like this horse," she said. "He carried me when I needed carrying." "You can like a horse and still do the right thing with him," Auguste said. She turned and looked at him, and they were standing 3 feet apart in the warm, dim air of the barn with hay dust turning in the light from the high window, and she said, "I know that." And he covered the 3 feet without thinking about it, without calculation, and kissed her, and she kissed him back with a directness that should not have surprised him by now but still did, warm and real, and without any performance at all. When they separated, she looked at him with those amber eyes. "I thought you were going to wait until the case was settled," she said. "I changed my mind," he said. "The calendar and I are not in agreement." She laughed, that real, warm laugh, and it bounced off the barn walls and came back to them and settled around them like something that lived there now. The journey to Santa Fe was made with care and planning. James Doyle was transported by wagon, which Reyes drove, with Elvira beside her father in the wagon bed on a mattress of folded quilts, because the roads were rough and his lungs needed gentle handling. August rode alongside on Providence. Ezra and Fletcher Howe rode ahead in Howe's hired buggy. They made it to Santa Fe in 2.5 days, stopping at an inn on the second night where James Doyle slept 11 hours and woke looking better than he had in the wagon. Santa Fe in 1882 was the territorial capital and a city of considerable age and considerable complexity. An old Spanish colonial city, overlaid with the patterns of American administration and the constant pressure of a territorial population that was diverse in ways that the eastern states were only beginning to reckon with. It had its plazas and its adobe buildings and its churches that were older than the United States, and its very new and very American courthouse, where Judge Armand Collies sat. Collies was a man of 60, silver-haired and careful, with the studied inscrutability of someone who had spent 30 years in rooms where people wanted things from him. He received Howe's petition and read it and agreed to a hearing in 3 days, which Howe said was as fast as they could hope for and faster than he had expected. Birch was in Santa Fe. They saw him twice, both times at a distance, and each time Elvira straightened her spine and looked directly at him without flinching, which August noticed and admired and did not comment on because she did not need his commentary on her own courage. The hearing was not a trial. It was a legal examination of the petition and the documentary evidence, and Howe presented it with the clean, economical precision of a man who had prepared it for weeks. He laid out the evidence in order: the documents, the journal, the copy, the Brennan records, the Garcia family's letter and attached documentation. He presented the visible alteration in the Hearst loan document and explained it. He laid out the pattern across 5 families. Cal Hearst was present with his own lawyer, a man named Theodore Greer who wore a very fine suit and had an expression of controlled contempt for everyone in the room. Greer objected to several of Howe's submissions, and Collies overruled most of them with a patience that suggested he was forming an opinion that was not favorable to Greer's client. James Doyle testified in a quiet, precise voice, sitting very upright in his chair, about what he had understood the loan terms to be on the day he signed, and he quoted his journal entry from memory before Howe presented the journal itself. Collies looked at the journal and at the document and at the discrepancy for a long time without speaking. Elvira was not called to testify because the documentary evidence was sufficient, but she sat in the gallery with her hands folded in her lap and her face composed, and August sat beside her, and at some point during James Doyle's testimony, their hands found each other without either of them looking down to manage it. Collies took one night to deliberate and returned the following morning with a ruling that was comprehensive, and within the hearing room, fell like a stone into still water. He found that the loan document showed evidence of fraudulent alteration. He declared the loan agreement void on grounds of fraud. He ordered a formal investigation into Hearst's land acquisition practices over the previous 5 years, which would be conducted by the Territorial Attorney General's office. He suspended the Birch warrant against Elvira Doyle as frivolous and improperly issued. He noted in his ruling, with a dryness that was judicial but pointed, that the use of law enforcement resources to facilitate private fraud was a matter that would receive separate attention. Hearst left the courtroom with Greer without looking at anyone, and the look on his face was the look of a man who had believed himself invulnerable and had just learned otherwise. Birch was in the corridor when they came out of the hearing room, and he looked at August and then at Elvira, and the look he gave them was flat and unreadable. And then he put his hat on and walked away, and August did not expect to see him professionally empowered in the territory much longer. Ezra shook Howe's hand and then Elvira's hand and said, with great satisfaction, "The numbers tell the truth eventually." Howe allowed himself a small, quiet smile and began repacking his leather case. Patrick Brennan, who had come down with them, pumped August's hand so hard his arm hurt, and then found Elvira and said, "Your mother is watching, girl, and she is satisfied." And Elvira pressed her lips together and nodded and did not cry, but it was a near thing. James Doyle said nothing for a long moment, sitting in the corridor on a bench, looking at the courthouse ceiling. Then he said to Elvira, "Your mother would have done the same thing, exactly the same thing." He paused. "But she would have been frightened doing it." "So was I," Elvira said. "Good," James said. "It does not count otherwise." August stood a little apart from this and watched it happen and felt something in him that was enormous and quiet and did not require words, the feeling of being in the right place at the right time, which was rare enough in a life that, when it arrived, it was recognizable. The drive back from Santa Fe to Cimarron, and then north to Rayado, took 3.5 days, slower than the trip down because there was no urgency now. James Doyle bore the journey well, sleeping in the wagon and talking in the evenings with August about ranching and cattle and the territory, conversations that had the texture of a man taking the measure of someone and finding the measure satisfactory. On the second evening, camped near a creek with a small fire and a clear sky overhead, James said to August, with no preamble at all, "What are your intentions regarding my daughter?" August had been waiting for this and had decided to answer it with the same honesty he tried to bring to everything. "I intend to ask her to marry me," he said. "After a reasonable amount of time, and if she will have me, which I am not entirely certain of, because she is a person who makes her own decisions and I would not have it any other way." James was quiet for a moment. "How long have you known her?" 3 weeks, August said. James made a sound that might have been a laugh suppressed or a comment contained. "I knew my wife for 2 weeks before I knew I wanted to marry her," he said. "It took me another 4 months to ask because I was worried about what reasonable people would say." He paused. "Those 4 months were wasted time." August nodded. "I will take that into account." "See that you do," James said, and went to check on the horses, which was his way of ending a conversation that had gone to its conclusion. Elvira came to sit beside August at the fire a few minutes later, and she looked at him with that particular expression that said she knew something had happened. "What did he say to you?" she asked. "We talked about ranching," August said. She looked at him steadily. "What else?" "About time and how much of it to waste," he said. She looked at the fire. "And what did you conclude?" "That I will ask you something when we are back at the farm," he said, "and that whatever the answer is, I will mean the question." She looked at him sideways, and in the firelight she was luminous and warm and entirely real, exactly what she had been on the road the first day, everything else stripped away. "All right," she said. They delivered James Doyle safely to the farm on the 4th day. The dog Compass launched himself at Elvira when they came into the yard and then transferred his enthusiasm to August, who was apparently now on the approved list, which James Doyle observed with a slight nod. Elvira showed August the farm properly, walking him around the fields and the garden and the barn, and the house with the pride and the love of someone showing a person, something important. The farm was solid and real, built with genuine care, and the fields, though the summer had been hard, were not ruined, and with another season of full attention they could be good again. In the late afternoon they walked to the edge of the east field, where the land dropped away slightly and you could see across the grass to the canyon in the distance, red in the evening light. "I love this land," she said, not to him particularly, just to the air. "I know," he said. She looked at him. He looked back. "Elvira Doyle," he said, "I have known you for 3.5 weeks, which I am aware is not long by most people's reckoning. But I also know that in 3.5 weeks I have seen you frightened and determined and grieving and honest and funny and absolutely unreasonable when someone tells you to stop weeding, and I have found every version of you more compelling than the last. I would like to spend the rest of my life in the vicinity of that experience." He paused. "What I am asking is whether you would consent to be my wife." She held his gaze for a long moment. The canyon burned in the distance. The grass moved in the evening wind. "Yes," she said, "I would." He reached out and took her hand, and she let him, and they stood there on the edge of the east field in the evening light of 1882, and August thought that this was the thing he had come out from Kentucky looking for, the thing that was his, though he had not known its shape until now. Not just land, not just the ranch, the life that filled it. They were married 2 months later in Cimarron, at the little church that had services on Sundays, on a bright October morning when the cottonwoods along the river had gone gold, and the air had its first serious edge of coolness. Ezra Holt stood up with August and Reyes Montoya's wife. A small and formidable woman named Luz stood up with Elvira. Denny and Tom and Reyes were in the front pews. Patrick Brennan came down from Rialto with his family. James Doyle, who had been having a better month with his lungs and had traveled the distance in the wagon without great difficulty, walked Elvira down the short aisle and handed her to August with an expression that was composed and quiet and full. Mrs. Cordelia Farmer was there, because she was at everything, and she wrote about the wedding in that week's newspaper with the observation that the match between Mr. August Ellsworth of the Cimarron district and Miss Elvira Doyle of Rialto is one which the community received with general satisfaction, as both parties are known to be of good sense and genuine character, which combination is rarer in marriage than it ought to be. This was widely agreed to be the most romantic thing Mrs. Farmer had ever committed to newsprint, which she did not acknowledge but which pleased her privately. The investigation that Judge Collies had ordered into Hearst's land practices concluded the following spring. The Territorial Attorney General's office found sufficient evidence of systematic fraud to bring charges, and Cal Hearst, faced with those charges and the prospect of a trial at which 5 families would testify against him, negotiated a settlement that included the return of land where he had acquired it through fraudulent loan practices and a substantial fine. The Garcia family returned to their land. The Brennan farm was fully secured. 3 other families whose cases had been identified in the investigation recovered what had been taken from them. Birch left the territory before the investigation was complete and was not replaced, and the Santa Fe Marshal's office was reorganized under new administration, which was not a full victory, but was considerably better than nothing. James Doyle's farm continued, and he was well enough through the following winter that he talked about expanding the south field, which Elvira encouraged while also gently ensuring that he did not overextend himself. She rode out to the Rialto farm twice a month from Cimarron, sometimes with August when the ranch could spare him, and sometimes alone on a good horse that August had bought her, a sturdy blue roan mare named Sunday who had the steadiness and temperament of a horse that has decided to be reliable and considers it a point of personal integrity. The Ellsworth ranch grew in the first years of their marriage, not recklessly but steadily, as things grow when they are tended with intelligence and patience. They added another 60 head of cattle. They extended the east pasture. August built a second room onto the house in the autumn of their first year because they needed it, and because he had always been the kind of man who built things when they needed building. In the spring of their second year, their first child arrived. A boy, healthy and loud from the first moment, with his father's dark hair and his mother's amber eyes, which combination was startlingly effective and caused Denny to go quiet with admiration when he first saw the baby, which for Denny was the equivalent of a speech. They named him James Francis Ellsworth, the James for her father and the Francis for her mother, and when Elvira told her father what the name was he sat very still for a moment and then said, "That is a good name," in the voice people use when they are containing something larger than what they have room for in a sentence. Young James was a serious and curious child from the beginning, interested in everything, following his father around the ranch with the focused attention of someone taking inventory. By the time he was 2, he had strong opinions about horses. By 3, he was in the garden with his mother, pulling weeds with more enthusiasm than precision, and Elvira taught him exactly what her mother had taught her, and August stood at the garden gate sometimes and watched them in the rows together, and felt something that was not a feeling he had a word for in English, though he imagined some language somewhere had a name for it. Their second child came 2.5 years after James, a girl this time, round-faced and decisive, who arrived with opinions and maintained them. They called her Frances Margaret, and she had her grandfather Doyle's eyes and her grandmother Frances's apparent determination to run every situation she found herself in, which showed up early and emphatically. James Doyle's health had its difficult seasons, but also its better ones, and he was present for both of his grandchildren's births, traveling carefully to Cimarron each time, and the sight of him holding the babies was the kind of sight that Elvira kept in a particular place inside herself, the place where she kept her mother, and the canyon, and the morning that August Ellsworth told a woman on a stolen horse to ride into his barn. By 1886, when James Francis was 4 and Frances was nearly 2, the case against Hearst was fully resolved, and the land questions were settled, and the territory was changing in the way territories do as they move toward statehood, with more law and more infrastructure, and more people coming in from the east with money and plans. August and Elvira discussed these changes on their porch in the evenings, which was still the thing they did, the evening conversations that had started the first week and had continued without interruption, evolving as they evolved, covering everything that mattered to both of them. One evening, on a night in the summer of 1887, 5 years after a woman had ridden up to his fence on a stolen horse with dust on her face and wind in her hair, August sat on the porch and looked out at the land that was his and hers and theirs and the children's. The 260 head grown now to nearly 400, the east pasture extended, the house added to twice, the garden expanded and immaculate. The barn painted red again because the paint had weathered and Elvira had said it needed doing, and she came out and sat beside him with a cup of coffee, and James, Francis, ran past them on some urgent 4-year-old errand involving a stick and something he had spotted near the fence, and Frances could be heard inside explaining something at length to Denny, who was her most patient audience. "Are you happy?" she asked. It was the question she asked him sometimes, not from doubt but from the same reason she asked everything, because she wanted to know the true answer and believed that asking directly was the only reliable method. "Yes," he said. "Extraordinarily." "Good," she said. "So am I." She leaned against him and he put his arm around her, and they sat there on the porch in the evening of a Tuesday in 1887 on the land he had built and she had come to, and that had become the shape of both their lives. And the stars were coming out one at a time over the canyon country, and the horses were settled in the barn, and the children were loud in their various directions, and August thought, This is the thing." James Francis came back to the porch at a dead run, and launched himself at August's knees, and said something about a toad, very urgently, and August extracted himself from Elvira's side, and went with his son to investigate the toad situation, which was real and significant and required adult attention, and Elvira watched them go in the last of the light and drank her coffee and was aware, in the complete and particular way of someone who has earned the life they are living, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The toad turned out to be a large and dignified specimen that had taken up residence under the porch step, and after due consideration, James Francis was persuaded that it should be left there, both because toads were beneficial to the garden, and because disturbing it would be rude, and August delivered both of these arguments with great seriousness, as his son deserved, and James Francis accepted them with the focused gravity of a 4-year-old processing important information. Later that night, when the children were asleep and the ranch was quiet, and the only sounds were the crickets and the horses settling and the late wind in the grass, August and Elvira sat at the kitchen table in the lamplight, and she told him that there would be a third baby in the spring. He looked at her across the table and she looked back at him, and neither of them said anything for a moment, because some things arrive beyond words, and trying to put words to them right away is a kind of violence against the feeling. "Boy or girl?" he said at last, which was not a meaningful question in 1887 New Mexico or anywhere else, but was the first thing that came into his head. "Impossible to know," she said. "Either way," he said. "Either way," she agreed. He reached across the table and took her hand, and she turned her hand over and held his, and the lamp burned steady between them, and outside the territory was enormous and full of stars, and inside the house were the sounds of two children sleeping and everything that had been built from nothing and everything that was still to come. The spring child was another boy. They called him William Fran Ellsworth, the Fran quietly for her mother, and he was born in late March of 1888 on a night when the wind was coming off the mountains, and the cottonwoods were just beginning to green, and Ezra Holt, who had become something between a grandfather figure and a permanent fixture in their lives, sat in the kitchen that night drinking coffee with Denny and waiting, and when he heard the baby cry, he put his coffee cup down and said, "Good," with the simple satisfaction of a man who had arranged to be present at moments that mattered. James Doyle died in the autumn of 1889, peacefully, in his own house at the farm in Rayado, with Elvira beside him. His lungs had finally reached the limit of what they would do, and he went in the way that people sometimes go when they have resolved what needed resolving and have no remaining business, which is with a kind of completion rather than interruption. He had met all three grandchildren. He had seen the Hearst matter resolved. He had watched his daughter build a life from the materials of her own choosing, and he had understood what he was watching. Elvira came back to the Cimarron ranch after the funeral with her grief intact and her spine straight, and August met her at the door and said nothing, and held her for a long time in the doorway of the house they had built, and she let herself be held, which was a thing she did not do easily and which he understood as the trust it was. She kept the Rayado farm. They hired a family to work it, a young couple named Ortega who were good with land, and whom Elvira interviewed with the thoroughness of someone who had grown up watching her mother manage things. And the farm stayed productive, and the land stayed in the Doyle name, which was the way James would have wanted it. The ranch in Cimarron continued to grow and to be itself, which was the best thing August could have said of it. By 1890, they had 430 head, a third ranch hand in addition to Denny and Tom, who had both stayed because the work was good and August was a fair man, and the food was excellent owing to Elvira's opinions about it. The children were loud and curious and various, James Francis serious and horse-mad, Frances ruling her brothers with a combination of charm and determination that Reyes Montoya said reminded him of someone but he could not say who, and William cheerful and easy and fond of mud. The territory of New Mexico would not become a state until 1912, which was 30 years away from the summer that Elvira Doyle had ridden up to August Ellsworth's fence on a horse she had borrowed without asking. By then everything had changed, and also nothing essential had changed, which is the nature of time in places built by the people who choose to stay in them. But in 1890, in the Cimarron district of New Mexico Territory, on a ranch that August had built and Elvira had come to, and that now belonged fully to both of them, and to the three children who ran through its fields and argued at its table and fed its horses and were growing up shaped by its particular light and space, there was a life. A real one, built from stubbornness and luck and a stolen horse, and a man who had known on some level, from the first moment, that the right thing to do was to tell the woman on the road to ride into the barn. It was a complete life, with its losses accounted for and its joys earned and its love daily and unperformed, and the kind that grows rather than fades, which is the only kind worth building a life around. Every evening they sat on the porch, and the stars came out over the canyon country, and the horses settled in the red-roofed barn, and the children were loud or were sleeping or were somewhere in between. And August and Elvira Ellsworth talked about everything that mattered in the voices of two people who had learned to trust each other completely, which is the greatest thing one person can learn from another, and the hardest, and the most worth it.